I'm Matt.
Hey, I'm Steve.
Hey, I'm John.
This is the Sober Friends Podcast. We're here for the sober curious, the new guy, and the old timer. We're here to talk about the stuff anyone looking to live alcohol-free has to face day to day, and how we overcame those struggles. We speak for no 12-step group, but we do try to remain anonymous. You're not alone. This is the Sober Friends Podcast. I read a great article in the New York Times this week. One of the best things that I did was getting a year's subscription to the New York Times. One of the reasons I did that is I am so sick of clicking on a link and then I hit the paywall. So at work, I can get a year's subscription for free. And it is the best thing that I have done. And Steve, I shared with you the other day this opinion essay from the New York Times, which I'm going to link. I have a gift link so you won't hit the paywall that I'll put it in the comments. And it's, are we thinking about obesity all wrong? And because I'm always thinking about alcoholism, I tied this right into alcoholism. And the idea overall in the article is obesity really a disease, or is it the symptom or side effect of another disease? And I think we can say the same about alcoholism. Good morning, Steve. How are you?
Good morning, Matt. I'm good today. It's really good to be here. Yeah, thanks for that link. That article is really thought-provoking. It really was a great article. Once, I read it a couple times just so I could get a feel of it. But yeah, it's just, again, it just attacks it right on, and it talks about how different countries talk about things differently, and it's just thought-provoking, and we both, chatting before we started recording, we talked about how we think it ties into alcoholism, and how through our own experience of recovery, that maybe it's something to think about with us, too. Is the problem alcoholism, or is the problem something else that alcoholism is just masking? So, yeah, I think it could be a great topic. I think that hopefully it'll be thought-provoking for our audience, and yeah, let's get to it.
I think about food. I'm in the process of losing weight. So I'm down about 35 pounds at this point from March. And I've got a way to go of where I'd like to be. And this was really driven by sleep apnea, that I wanted to get my weight down. I knew that this would help. And now I've built some momentum. I was in two supermarkets yesterday, two of my favorite supermarkets, Whole Foods and Stu Leonard's. And I am thinking through how to eat better. And when I am in these supermarkets, well, especially yesterday, I was really struggling going through certain aisles, especially where like the sweets were and the breads were. And these are the things that trip me up. And I really was thinking about this article, that this is really hard. And I just can't avoid eating all food. I have to eat something. I can avoid alcohol. And just really thinking through, when I'm thinking these thoughts, where are they coming from? What am I feeling? Is there some type of trigger? What gets me to the point that I want to eat these foods? And I remembered a memory back when maybe I was like 4 or 5 years old, that I remember thinking that the afterlife in heaven for me would be, being in one of those kiddie pools, and you being surrounded by as much McDonald's cheeseburgers as you could eat, and there being no negative effects. And that's like as a 4 or 5 year old.
Yeah, we both talk about how we grew up, not really wealthy. I had the same thing, right? I mean, I just wrote down a little thing, food scarcity, right? Like I've talked about it. Like I grew up with 6 kids, one dad only working, right? Mom had 6 kids, she couldn't work, and dad working in a corrugated box factory, not making a lot of money. So, right, the whole deal with dad was just to put enough food and keep a roof over our head. I grew up with powdered milk, right? I talk about that all the time because it was disgusting. I mean, I remember the simple little thing that getting a glass of real milk or getting milk in school when we could afford it, right? You could buy milk a little bit before times, but we could buy milk in a carton for like a break or lunch. Like what a treat that was, you know? And I can remember, like I had a paper route, and one of my favorite things to do on the paper route was literally walk, and I was young, walk down to La Plaza where they had a little lunch counter, right, at one of the grocery stores, or, you know, one of the Kresge's, I think it was, and sit down and buy myself some French fries or something, right? Like that was a young kid. I was probably 10 years old doing that, right? I was already setting that up. So I don't know why, but I've run into that same problem with you. I've had that same issue with the weight. We talk about it. I've been up and down. I'm always up and down. And right now I'm sort of on an up thing. It's not funny. You know, it's really not pleasant to be there. So there is an underlying issue with that. And then we always talk about it. And I just shared before, it's like, you know, when I came into the rooms, you know, I just said this. I was at our buddy Timmy's meeting a couple weekends ago, and Timmy said, you know, little did I know that quitting drinking was the easy part, right?
Yes.
And I started saying, I told you, I've been able to speak at meetings for 3 times in the last like 2 weeks. Really a sort of a weird thing that went on, just the way it worked out. And one of the things I said, I've used that quote because and that's what I say is that, you know, what I realize now is that for the rest of the time I'm in AA, I'm not working on quitting drinking. I am working on staying away from a drink a little bit, but I'm really working on the underlying character defects of the problems that caused me to drink in the first place. Mm-hmm. So there goes the question. Is the alcohol the problem, or is there something else, right? Like, what are we treating? And that's what this whole article talks about. Like, what are we treating, you know? And it's really a great thought-provoking article. If you're listening to this, I highly encourage you to click on the link, give this thing a read, and I think you'll see the association for most of us of maybe like we think about alcohol wrong, or not wrong. I don't think it's wrong, because certainly drinking to the extent where we can hurt other people or destroy our lives, there's a lot of problems with alcohol. But just, are we looking at the whole thing wrong?
Yeah, I think we are. And if you take obesity out and you just replace alcohol in there, it fits perfectly.
Yeah.
And it did make me think about how many people fail coming into a 12-step program and finding permanent sobriety. We see the same people week in and week out in our meetings. And every once in a while, I wouldn't say every once in a while there are new people. New people come and go, but they mostly go. And for the most part, they don't add to the group. They do from time to time. But for the most part, it's a handful here and there, maybe per year. And is it that a 12-step program like Alcoholics Anonymous is the problem? Or is it the way we are going in to address how to stay sober because we're focusing on the wrong place? Is that also why people have a hard time losing weight and keeping it off without bariatric surgery? Right.
Yeah, it's complicated, obviously, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because when an alcoholic or an addict or anything, and this goes to anything that you might be struggling with addiction, but for us it's alcohol. When an alcoholic comes into the room, the first thing we do need to do is stop drinking, right? I do one of the other jokes. It's not even a joke. It's a reality. I get laughs. That's why I think it's a joke. But I realized when I first came into the program in 1995, I was still drinking for a few weeks before I, was able to put down the bottle. And the thought occurred to me, and I say this a lot, and a lot of times it'll get laughed. The thought occurred to me, if I want to get sober, that I have to stop drinking, right? Like I had to figure out. I had scaled it back, but I was still drinking. Like, if I really want AA to work, if I really want to get sober, I need to stop drinking completely, which seemed, at the time, was a challenge, So we do need to do that, right? I was at a meeting Friday night, and there was a young guy who I knew he's been in and out for a while. And I did tell him, like, he's like, oh, I'm back for 2 months and I need to do this and I need to do that. And I'm like, you know what you need to do is not drink and go to meetings right now. That's what you need to do at 2 months sober. Don't make it complicated. Don't drink and go to meetings, you know? And I know people hate that, but the truth is when you're early in sobriety, that sometimes that's all you can do is don't drink and go to meetings until you get that distance and you can start doing some of the other work. So there is that. Right. And that's where alcohol is a little bit different, is that you can actually make that stop where, and maybe, you know, when you're talking about being obese or something, it's a little bit harder, but, you know, still, like all of us, like you, like me, who struggle with it, right? The first thing we got to do is stop eating crappy food, right? I mean, and we got to eat healthy food. Now, you can eat healthy food and eat too much of it and be obese.
Yes.
So it's a little bit, again, it's a little bit different there. But I just think, I do go back and think about it, right? I talk about once I stop drinking, why do I go to AA these days? Why do I go to meetings? Why did I go to 5 meetings last week? Really, 5 meetings last week. Why did I do that? Because I need to work on the things that still give me problems, right? The things that still piss me off, the things that, you know, I get pissed off because I don't have control over, like all of those same character defects that are just always there for me. They are always there. So I go to manage those symptoms, those character defects. That's why I go to meetings, because if I take care of those defects, of those problems, if I can manage those, then the alcohol part takes care of itself, right? And that's what we're talking about today. I need to manage that other stuff, because if I do that, then the alcohol's not a problem, you know? So I really think it's a great thought, like, okay, what am I doing here? Like once you remove the alcohol, what am I treating? And I'm treating me, right? I'm treating my thoughts. I'm treating my feelings. I'm treating how to handle that kind of stuff.
I've been working for a while now in therapy, the self-esteem aspect of feeling worthy. This week I went to my daughter's open house at the elementary school. And anytime I'm in an environment where there are lots of people, lots of new people, I get anxiety and I can be a little bitchy because I'm really uncomfortable. Right. And I remember that there are things that I could do to minimize that in the past, which was drinking. I could kind of get through the social anxiety by drinking. If there were food and stuff, I would overindulge with that. So there were those things. And I don't have that anymore. So I can just shut down and be terrible, or I can learn to push through what I'm feeling and find some coping mechanisms so I don't have to have those. But I thought about that, and it was, once again, it was uncomfortable. And I tried, I wouldn't say I tried. I put my best effort forward to move through those things and put myself out there and think through that I do have something to offer. But it's hard sometimes without alcohol, so I have to have other tools. And it's a lot easier in a 12-step group because I know everybody's on the same footing as me. But outside, it's still hard. And that's where I think about, that's kind of where I think about the alcoholism itself is not the disease. It's the underlying mental illness of whatever that is. And for me, it is anxiety. It is social anxiety. And I think a lot of it really is social anxiety, a fear of people I don't know that they're going to judge me. And I can drink to get through that. And so that's the thing I need to work on.
Yeah. That is the things we need to work on, right? Like, you know, I look at all the time, you know, one of the things that our program, I don't want to say demands of us, but wants us to do is constantly look at ourselves and try to figure out what's going on. And I'm in a spot right now. I went up to Timmy's last night for a meeting because, you know, our buddy Timmy's like, oh, Steve, what are you doing here again? And like, Timmy, don't get excited. It's not because I like you. I needed a meeting, so I went to your house. Like, that's as simple as it is for me. Like, I went to the Timmy's because he has a meeting on Saturday night. Um, and it's a meeting where I know a bunch of people and I could feel comfortable in. It's like I'm always thinking about what do I need to do, and I have some things, right? I have some things that I need to do, right? And I could procrastinate and tell myself, oh, maybe I don't need to do those right away. I'm doing okay. I'm doing all that kind of stuff. But it's come to a head for me where I need to do something. So for me, one of the things is like I have a sponsor in name only. And I've been talking about it for probably a couple of years now. Like I need to step up and probably get another sponsor. And my sponsor's fine. I mean, I don't know what it is. He would help me. I feel like I'm bothering him. I don't know what it is, but I think it's time for me probably to try something new. So it's for me to go out, talk to my current sponsor, who's, like I said, is sponsor in name only, on my part, not on his part. Again, I want to make that clear in case anybody's listening to this. It's nothing to do with him. It's about me, and maybe try something else. And I think I probably need to go through the steps again. So I need to start doing some of that stuff. And then the other thing I need to do, we've talked about it before, I really need to meditate. I realize that one of the things I need to add to my life right now is a regular meditation. I need to do those two things. And I think I'll get a lot of relief from those two things. Now, just like being obese, right? If I want to not be obese and I want to not suffer from that, then I need to take some action. And again, we can get into it. Like there are some medical issues that'll make people obese, right? There are thyroid issues and stuff, and there are some things like that will make people obese where they need medical intervention. But I have to be able to look at what I need and then take some personal responsibility and take some action, right? And then obviously if I need more, and this is the other thing we talk about, right, is needing help, right? If I need help, then I need to reach out and ask people for help. And like that's, in our recovery, that's sponsorship, right? That's me going up to somebody saying, hey, I need some help. I want to do this. Will you be willing to help me? I already know the answer, right? The answer is going to be sure. I'll help you.
Yes.
I'll help you. Yeah, let's go. Let's plan on getting together. And so the problem is me, which it always is. So I need to do that. One of the things I loved about this article is it talks about being obese, especially it talks about obesity based upon BMI, right? And it talks about bariatric surgery, and you can only get it with certain levels of BMI. And it talks about how that's a really bad measurement, right? Like you have to be a certain, I forget what it was. You have to be like maybe over 35 BMI to get that surgery, or whatever it might be. And it talks about how this is a bad thing. So we talked about, right? You can be a muscle bound guy, and you can have a high BMI because it's just it's a mathematical formula is all it is. And it talks about how it doesn't look at the underlying causes and where maybe some of your excess fat might be stored and all those type of things. But obesity isn't declared a disease in all the places, right? And it talks all in, Denmark, Netherlands area where it's not. It's talked about and it's classified as a symptom more than a disease. And just like alcoholism, when we come into the rooms, it's really put out there as a disease. And what that does for us, it gives us some cover, if you will, right? It gives us some cover like, oh, I'm not a piece of shit person because I drink too much. I have a disease, right? So it gives us a cover. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing because I think a lot of us have been helped with the fact that some of this is out of my control. And again, I don't know. I grew up in an alcoholic family, right? So
yes.
Is there a genetic link? I don't know. I mean, there's a correlation, right? There's a correlation. If you grow up in an alcoholic family, you probably, but you're probably more apt to be alcoholic than if you don't. But there's never been a causation, right, linked to it. So again, it's one of these unknowns. All I know is that in my family, I just look at it and like, yeah, there seems to be something, whether it was environmental or genetic. I don't know. But, and a little bit of that is the same thing with obesity. Like, I don't know why I struggle with weight. I don't know why I do it. So It's great. It's thought-provoking. That article made me think about it, and hopefully it'll call me to action on a couple fronts.
It made me feel a lot better because it made me feel as though there's nothing wrong with me character-wise. There's nothing that I just can't control my eating. This kind of makes sense. There might be something inside my metabolism or inside how I think about food that predisposes me to want to eat too much. Now, what also happens is if you add processed foods into the mix, that there are certain things that I just can't stop at. Yeah. And there are other people who that's not an issue with. But I look around. I was at a soccer game while I was going through the article, and I look around and I see people who are heavier, and there also seems to be kind of a pattern there. And I think these are people who, I will tell you, my father-in-law, who is heavy, who is over 300 pounds and is about as tall as me and does not eat well, was talking about his grandniece. And he said, so-and-so saw her, and she's bigger than ever. She's fat. She's big, fat, and blubbery. And I'm thinking to myself, do you think she wants to be that big? Right. Do you think that she feels good about being that big? They're like, oh, I'm this big. I'm dead sexy. I'm sure that's not how she feels. Right. And I was looking through all the people at the game who were heavier and thinking with empathy, nobody looks around and is this weight and says, this is the exact way I always wanted to be. People would love to be at the right body weight. And there's something beyond that is causing them not to be.
Yeah, part of that is exactly what you said. It's processed foods, and I don't want to go down a rabbit hole with that. But years ago, and I'm talking, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, I remember watching something on TV, and they were talking about food manufacturers. And there's a whole science about how you create food taste. And one of the things they talked about was, I don't know if it was a piece of candy or some type of hard candy or something like that. You put it in your mouth. In fact, I think it was 60 Minutes. It was an article. You put it in your mouth, and it tastes like tangerine. Mm-hmm. And the whole point was, you don't want it to taste too much like tangerine, and you also don't want that taste to last too long. You want that taste to disappear so that you'll want another one. And that's the food science, right? And like I said, they're not looking to get people obese or fat. They're looking to sell more product, right? So they made that clear. No, these aren't people who are out there to kill people, but they're in the food selling business. So the science is to make something taste good and make you want more of it, which comes into processed foods, right? You think about processed food. You eat them, they metabolize very quickly, and what happens? Oh, I want more. I want more. I want more, right? And again, it's not that these people are evil, but it's that they're in that process, and there is a whole science behind it. So some of it is that, right? Because since the advent of processed food, we do have people walking around, especially what's happening in this article talks about it. Obesity started being a problem in wealthy, developed countries more than other places, right? And why is that? Because these other places, they don't have access to cheap, processed foods, right? So it really became apparent that in more wealthier countries, it became a problem. So there is a whole correlation, problem, and I would think maybe even some of that is a causation link of why that happens. So again, to bring it back to alcoholism, when I look at my own alcoholism, and again, I really don't care why I became alcoholic. That was one of the other things. And maybe I don't care why I'm heavy and I struggle with my weight. Oh, maybe I should. I don't know. It's a brand new article that gets me thinking. But what I do know is that I have to constantly treat my alcoholism, right? Like we talk about all the time. We talk about your wife. We talk about my wife. My wife had a bottle of wine And it's funny, and I'll tell this story. I went in there, and I'm telling you, there wasn't enough wine. I have no idea why she would leave that little bit of wine in a bottle. I'm like, why wouldn't you just pour that in your glass and finish it? First of all, I noticed that, right? That tells me I'm an alcoholic. Like, I notice how little, right? And so I'm always looking like she doesn't need to do those things. To her, it doesn't matter. For me, I need to constantly treat my alcoholism to make sure that, I'm safe around it, right? And again, and that to me is, I don't ever think picking up a drink is a solution for me like it used to be. It used to be my solution. I don't think that today at all. But I also know that I'm at risk. I'm always at risk for thinking that it's a solution if I don't do work, which is attacking the underlying problems, which is what we're talking about today.
My friend Jill Teets has talked about the dopamine aspect of this.
Yeah.
If you're interested in some of the science, you can listen to her podcast, Sober Powered. But she's talked about how there are some people who have a problem with alcohol who might not get enough dopamine. So the hit of alcohol or good food or whatever actually gives them a boost of dopamine. So you want to go back to it over and over again because you're not getting the dopamine that normal people do. I think about that with food for me. There was another, I'm blanking on, I had another example of this outside of food. But I think about it with, they were passing around munchkins at the game. And I see people having like one or two munchkins slowly, and they're done. If I have one munchkin, after that first one, I want to take two hands
right,
and put them all in my mouth at once.
Absolutely.
So I can't eat them at all.
Yeah.
My friend told me he doesn't eat pizza anymore. Why don't you eat pizza? Because I can't have one or two slices.
Right.
And I can identify with that. And to me, it is the same feeling as alcohol.
It is. It's exactly the same feeling. I identify with both of those. Like, if I could walk by that box of munchkins, I'm fine. But as soon as I dip in, even if and it is just like alcohol, even if I could have the willpower not to go back for 2 or 3 or 4 or 5, I'm thinking about going back for that, right? Pizza the same way. I love pizza, right? Pizza, and it's the same thing. Like, I'm usually, when I eat pizza, I'm like, screw it. If I'm going to have pizza, I'm just going to eat pizza. I'll eat as much as I want. And it is the exact same thing. And a lot of times, my wife and I, she likes to go out to eat, and I don't like to go out to eat because I find like I can't. First of all, I don't want to go out and spend a lot of money on a salad or something that I can make at home, right? That's the first thing. So, and if I'm going to order something other than that, even like a fairly healthy dish, chicken, or like, it's not going to be as healthy. It's going to be lots of fat, lots of salt, because they want it to taste good, right? They want to, you're paying money for it. So I don't like to go out to eat as much as she does because of that. I prefer to try to control my own food. And it's just, and it is, for me, that it's that feeling, again, which is what we're talking about. So there's something that is in us, you and I, because we struggle with the same thing, that gets us to do that with alcohol and food, right? So maybe it's not the alcohol or the food, it's us. Maybe it's in our brain.
Yeah.
Just to give a shout out for something if you want to read, I read a book a while ago and I was Googling it here. It's called Never Enough. It's about a woman. It's Judith Grisel. She was an addict, and she became a neuroscientist because she literally wanted to find out why she became an addict, like why her brain worked that way. It's an incredible read. It is a little tough. But she's really, really good. Her story as an addict is really, really good. And I highly encourage you to, maybe you could link that one too, Matt.
Yes.
I highly encourage you to read this if you want to know about the neuroscience of addiction and dopamine and all these things and how. And again, it's not just alcohol. I'm sure it's food. I'm sure you could take this stuff. The food affects your brain in the same way, right? I'm sure when I eat a donut hole, my brain goes, "Ooh, that was great. Let's do it again." You know, it's like everything else. But anyway, I highly recommend that book. It's actually a book that I may get out now that I think about it. I'm looking for another book to read. I'm going on retreat in a few weeks, so I may pick up that book and take it with me on retreat so I can be reading it while I'm on retreat and remind me of it's really a good read. So
I've got a ton of Audible credits, so I might just download it.
Yeah.
I do a lot now with Audible books because I can absorb it better.
Yeah.
The best way for me to go is read it with the audio book, but I'm interested in this one. I'll have to reach out to Jill and see if she knows this one, because that's what she does. She's a scientist, and I am not. We would love to hear what your thoughts on this. How do you feel about that? Does that make you a little angry that we talked about maybe it's not directly a disease? Does it go against the things that you've heard? Do you agree with it? Do you struggle with food and alcohol? Was food fine, but alcohol was your only thing? Matt at SoberFriendsPod.com, at SoberFriends on Instagram. Thanks for talking this through with me today, Steve.
Hey, Matt, great article. Thanks for the link. And great being on with you.
Absolutely. See everybody next week. Bye, everybody. You made it this far into the podcast. That tells me you're a pretty big fan. If you like what we do and you find value in the podcast, consider a donation at buymeacoffee.com/SoberFriendsPod. Your donation keeps us on the air to help out the new guy and helps us defray some of our costs. If you find value in our podcast, please consider a donation at buymeacoffee.com/SoberFriendsPod.